How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
Do you think Nigel Farage could be the next Prime Minister?
No, don't.
Why? That was a very certain answer. Why?
We've just passed a stall. There's a Nigel Farage mug next to a Gollywog mug, and that says it all. So. And that is exactly what the man is. Racist, yes. Millionaire who is looking after himself. And people are so foolish. I remember Brexit with that red bus and all those millions that were coming to the NHS. I work in the NHS. Didn't see a penny of it. Lies, lies, lies. The man is a liar.
So somebody in the NHS, you think Labour are going to
they're
send the
doing it already.
country in the right direction?
Yeah, waiting lists are going down. They're getting rid of the Quango, NHS England. Definitely doing the right thing. Got to bite the bullets for another 6 months at least. I think a lot of people are not reading behind the headlines, basically. A lot of people are hung up as well on losing the winter fuel allowance. Yes. The King got the winter fuel allowance. Millionaires got the winter fuel allowance. Get real, people.
Quiet Riot. Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the early bloom before the harvest of our main Thursday show. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I'm Naomi.
And I'm Alex. How are you this bank holiday weekend, Naomi? It's sunny at the moment, but I think it's due to get dramatically colder by Monday.
Tell me this is a British podcast without telling me it's a British podcast. Straight into the weather.
And I'm Greek. I've been here too fucking long.
No, I'm good. I was in Brussels last week, rushed back, did the show, did the election stuff, and I'm rushing off to Belfast to do more business roundtables ahead of the von der Leyen Starmer summit next week. So I've got a couple of days to chill, but I'm actually not really having Bank Holiday Monday because that's when I travel again. But yeah, no, just about got time to wash my clothes.
I haven't asked you what the gossip from Brussels is.
Very similar to what you often hear, which is the UK is not a priority in the EU. Please don't labour under any misapprehension that you are in the top 20 things that the continent is worried about and facing and dealing with. But
hang on, we were in the top 20 even before Trump. I think we were 16.
Yeah, we were 16.
Have we dropped down the order?
I think maybe we have a bit, but only because there are sort of escalating domestic issues for a lot of them and things like that. But they really sort of dividing at the moment into our Northern European allies, and particularly Germany, but also in the east with Poland, obviously Ireland, obviously Netherlands, and then France, which is probably on the more UK sceptical side of what can and should be done in and around the reset. It's definitely feeling like there will probably be two packages, if you like, that emerge over the course of the next 8 months. So we'll have the May summit. That will have the big announcement around defence and security. And there will be this strategic partnership, political declaration, whatever it's called, that will talk about some of the other ambitions that the UK and the EU will be focused on. And we may see youth visa scheme in there. We may see some of the agri-food bits. But then it's anticipated that around November time, a second package might be debated within the Commission on the EU side and then agreed with the UK for all of the stuff around removing the trade barriers more broadly that we need, because the TCA review, that Brexit deal review, is May 2026. So gossip is that it's kind of going to be a two-stage thing.
Interesting. And Ursula von der Leyen has always represented the kind of Northern European school of thought, I guess, and having just been re-elected in her position, and with Macron on his way out, and a new German chancellor in, the importance of the French position will be marginally lower than it might have been 2 or 3 years ago, I guess.
Maybe. Let's see. All fingers crossed for a breakthrough. Now, listeners, I know that you all know just how hard Alex and I work. We juggle full-time jobs around podcasting, and I cannot stress enough how grateful we are to those who can back us as paid supporters. If you already have a million thank yous. If you've not yet and would like to, head on over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod for as little as £5 a month to help keep the show going.
And don't forget the myriad other ways you can help if you can't afford to give us £5 a month, by using our bookshop, by leaving us a review wherever you get your podcast. Remember, you can leave multiple reviews, and by sharing the show on social media or with friends and family who might also enjoy it.
Now, Alex, it won't take a genius to guess that we're going to be talking about Thursday's local and mayoral elections, and of course that by-election, now that the numbers are all in and the first responses from political leaders and commentators have begun. But I think there's another election you'd like to cover too.
Oh, yes. We weren't alone having elections in the Anglosphere in the last few days, because it wasn't just Canada and the UK. Australia also went to the polls in a general election, with Labour emerging the victor in a reversal of recent polls. Again, similar but not of the size that we saw in Canada. So we'll talk about that too. Sorry, Romania, your results are simply just a tad too late to include, but we will talk about them on next week's show.
So let's not waste another second, and onwards for the rest of Sunday school. Quiet Riot. It was always going to be a night of upset. Reform UK made huge gains, took control of 10 councils, and won the Runcorn and Helsby by-election by just 6 agonising votes ahead of Labour after recounts. Labour and Tories both took punishment beatings, failing to hold on to any of the councils they controlled before the election. 2021, the last time these seats were contested, was a particularly high watermark for the Conservatives, so their hammering is perhaps less surprising. And meanwhile, the Lib Dems significantly increased their councillor numbers, gained control of 3 councils, and the Greens more than doubled their councillor base. Labour fared better in the mayoral races, retaining 3. The Tories gained 1, and Reform took the 2 newly created mayoralties.
For many of you, you won't have been in council office before, but remember, stick to our principles. And I would advise anybody who's working for Durham County Council on climate change initiatives or diversity, equity and inclusion, or anything, or things they could go on working from home, I think you all better really be seeking alternative careers very, very quickly.
And so, the post-match chat is now in full swing. Keir Starmer has reacted to say his government must go further and faster to deliver the change they were elected to last July. Kemi Badenoch has apologised to her party for the, quote, bloodbath. Farage has, of course, just gloated. Ed Davey claims his party is now the party of Middle England. Maybe he left out the word class there. And the Greens are boasting that they can win seats from Labour and the Tories. Godfather of British polling, John Curtis, says that the core Labour voter in our society is now young, middle-class professional living in London. It is not the coal miner living in Durham. That is a fundamental social change, and it is not entirely clear that either of our 2 biggest parties have really accommodated themselves to the changing environment in which they find themselves. End quote. Now, listeners, before we begin, a quick note to say we will probably focus today mostly on Labour and Tories and Reform, because over the next few Quiet Riots, we have got guests from the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. So please don't think we aren't going to cover their victories. We are, just not in the time limit that we've got on today's show. So, Alex, for our listeners today, probably the most important thing for us to focus on is what lessons the Labour government will draw from this set of election results. The immediate reaction from some left-leaning MPs on Friday was dismay at the further, faster messaging, presumably because they fear that further and faster means on issues like immigration and spending cuts, not on issues like delivering growth from EU trade, meeting net zero commitments and things like that. But for the most part, the Labour MPs at least seem to be keeping pretty stum about what can only be described as a worrying night for their prospects ahead of the next general election. So do you think it's likely that we might see a tack away from what is being referred to as the Morgan McSweeney school of thought? Like, will they stick with the current plan or have pause for thought and twist a bit after Thursday's results?
There are substantial rumours of a cabinet reshuffle.
Yep.
in the early summer. I think that will be part of the Labour reaction. And I think that will give us big clues as to the direction in which they're heading. If they get rid of someone like Ed Miliband, that gives a very clear signal that they're moving to a defensive position with regard to reform.
Yeah.
If they move around people who have been more active on the socially conservative side of things and more Eurosceptic, if they shuffle those out, I think that will give a significant clue that they're heading in the opposite direction. So we'll wait and see what that brings. I think it's important to distinguish that there are several effects of this election, and many of them are overstated and some of them are understated. And so I think it helps to be clear about those. So first of all, you have a direct effect, right? Big locally, because you have different people running your local council or whatever, but they're small nationally. They don't mean a huge amount to the national picture. The second effect is reputational, which is really important for a sort of insurgent party like Reform to maintain momentum, to maintain the media narrative that they can do it, they can form the next government. It's hugely important to them, but not irreversible. We have seen media narratives like that fall apart very quickly in the past. The third effect is political. So that is the bit that includes how Labour will respond. I have seen a lot of quite simplistic takes. What Labour need to do is 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3 almost always aligns with what that person thought Labour should do before the results of this election. That's not to discredit it. It might be right, it might be wrong. All I'm saying is that it does not appear to me like this result has fed into what people were thinking and changed minds in a fundamental way. All in all, Labour doing badly has simply reinforced pre-existing ideas in people's minds about why Labour is doing badly. So there are people going, Labour just need to stop talking about immigration and forge a much closer relationship with the EU, a position with which we would agree, right? But that was their narrative before these results, and it's their narrative after these results. And there are people saying Labour has to go hard on sort of blue Labour, socially conservative stuff, really go after immigration. And that broadly tacks with what those people were thinking before. So I think it will take a little bit of time to percolate and look at the detailed result of how voters moved. Because there is a danger at the moment that you look at the total of what Tories lost and what Reform gained, and it's almost identical, right? You look at the total of what Labour lost and what Lib Dems and Greens gained, and it's almost identical.
Right.
So it's very easy to go, oh, well, that shows you what needs to happen. But the actual results might not be like that at all. You know, Labour might have lost the majority of those councillors to Reform, and several Tory ones might have been lost to the Lib Dems and some to the Greens. So it's not as simple a mathematical proposition.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right in saying that I don't think anyone should really overreact to what has just happened. And as I mentioned at the beginning, 2021 was this seismic event for the Conservative Party in these seats the last time they were contested, and their vote share has been halved from high 40s to low 20s if you compare vote share to vote share 2021 to 2025. So there isn't a need to overreact. I would add a fourth dimension to the three that you mentioned just now, and that's international reaction. Because if you are in Brussels watching what is happening in the UK, you are going to be thinking, okay, what can we do now that we want to do with the UK while they do have a more Euro-friendly government in place, and get that locked in and baked in before the next election, which now does not look like quite such a dead set for them to hold on to their whopper majority? And are there some things that we can't afford to have undone if there is a Eurosceptic government after the next election, because we currently still feel the scar tissue from the Johnson administration years? So I do think, and I hear it. It came up from an MEP that I was with who sits on the PPA, the Parliamentary Association. There's a UK one and an EU one, and they meet up a couple of times a year to discuss UK EU matters, and they were saying, we do watch what is happening and we are worried about it. So just adding, I didn't disagree with your three, but I think there is also a fourth angle there.
That's a fifth one, actually, because I have a fourth one, but we can leave that for further down the conversation. But I think you're absolutely right. And I think that ties into my more general view of what is going wrong with Labour at the moment. Having condemned simplistic takes, I'm about to give my own. I am perfectly aware of the irony. In my defense, my simplistic take is not about adopt policies A, B, and C and everything will be fine. It's about something a little bit more profound and functional than that. I think Labour need to start governing. I think Labour need to stop triangulating and start running the country. Because what I'm seeing at the moment is that they are wasting the term they've been given worrying about whether they will get a second term. They've decided, obviously, that they need a second term to implement their full program of change. And what that has resulted in is a sort of paralysis of using fully their first term. Whatever happens at the next election, the likelihood is that Labour will not have the majority and authority they have right now. They have a massive majority in Parliament. They can make changes to the country right now. They can do a lot of good by ceasing to be terrified about what happens in 2029 and grabbing what is in front of them in 2025.
I couldn't agree with you more. They have entrapped themselves by a kind of triangulation fundamentalism. And for many voters, that's coming across as wanting to operate within the existing power dynamics, within existing wealth dynamics, rather than change them. And that means that there isn't the leadership and inspiration there that I think a lot of voters are looking for and hoping for. And you're right, just get on with using your 400 and however many it is now MPs to
do stuff,
deliver and do stuff and grab the bull by the horns and comms it. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But look, Labour is losing votes in different directions. And that isn't just from the poll that we had on Thursday night. It is from by-election results at local elections around the country since last July and in sort of national polling numbers. And we've got a highly fragmented party system now. And it is clear that they are losing more votes to the Greens and Lib Dems than to Reform. And you said that yourself. When you're looking at the numbers, it's quite clear that the Tories have been the main victims of Reform's success. There was a new poll for a public affairs firm, Appella Advisors, that was conducted by Find Out Now and reported in The Guardian this weekend. And they found that the threat of drifting progressive voters is quite significant. 2024 Labour voters, 43% said they would likely consider voting Green, 40% Lib Dems, and just 9% over to Reform, of those thinking about not voting Labour next time. If Labour knows this data, which of course they do, are they just concluding that at the next general election, progressives will fall in behind Labour and vote tactically en masse, as they did last year, to keep Farage out of number 10? I mean, is that the kind of bare calculation?
I'm afraid I don't think their thinking on the issue is that sophisticated. It sounds a strange thing to say, but Monday gone was the 15-year anniversary of that moment with Gillian Duffy, which I still think is a pivotal moment in our politics. And it feels like emotionally, Labour are still chasing Gillian Duffy's vote, only to the exclusion of any other votes. It just seems to me that that was such a traumatic moment that all of Labour's thinking is we must recover that one vote.
So the appeasement of bigot strategy and doesn't establish a kind of Labour vote, just kind of short-term opportunism without resilience, but short-termist for 15 years.
Yeah, I would add some nuance to that. I don't agree that some of the policies Labour are pursuing fit under that umbrella as neatly as some of their critics suggest, right? I would say that a party that wants to represent rule of law, which is something that people appreciate, and I think something that British people particularly crave, this idea that there are rules and they apply to everyone. I don't think that can be ignored. And I do think a Labour government has a responsibility and a duty to effectively control immigration. That doesn't point to a particular result. That doesn't point to being nasty to immigrants. That doesn't point to less immigration. It just points to a government that administratively is in charge of that process, that knows who is coming into the country, that can process applications for asylum quickly and effectively, so people don't end up in some purgatory of a hotel for years waiting for a decision, right? I think those things are not incompatible with Labour values. It is annoying to me that Liberals react to any kind of initiative around those things negatively, as if all of it means being nasty to immigrants. Some of it actually can result to people being more relaxed about immigration. If people feel that the government has control of these areas, they can relax about immigration. We saw that actually after the Brexit vote. As illusory as that control that was promised was, the very next social attitude survey had the lowest concern about immigration we've seen in decades. Because people felt like there was control over the situation. So it's not necessarily to do with tone or numbers. And that would be my caveat. But on the whole, I think Labour just need to start governing like a Labour government. It is inauthentic. It grates with people for Labour to be punishing people who receive disability benefits or be going after trans rights. So there are things that are authentic for a party and inauthentic for another party.
Indeed.
And if you choose to do the inauthentic thing for your party, then you get punished twice. You get punished by your own voters for doing the wrong thing, and you get punished by opposition voters for being a liar.
When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
Even if you do take the view that Labour is at risk from the march of Reform UK, it doesn't appear that people are switching over to reform on those very socially conservative reasons you've just stated. You know, scroungers on benefits need to get back to work, immigrants are running the country into the ground. Our friends at 38 Degrees did some immediate analysis after the Runcorn election was in, and they spoke to converts from Labour to Reform, Lib Dem and Green. And it was the cost of living that prevailed across all groups, not immigration. The removal of winter fuel allowance for all but the poorest pensioners, along with cuts to disability, which you've just mentioned, were referenced by participant after participant in that focus group as their source of disillusionment. Really worryingly, maybe more worryingly, and this is again to your point about getting on and governing, is around the lack of good comms, because many voters were simply unaware of some of the good things that they have done. So they were given examples of government policies that have happened since July. The minimum wage rise, hugely popular among participants. They just didn't know about it, or it wasn't front and centre of their minds. And one Reform convert said, "It's the only thing that stood out as positive, but I only knew about it because my flatmate told me." So, Alex, why do you think government comms are still so bad? Why are they not getting cut through on the good stuff happening? Why are they not repeating over and over and over again the good things that they've done, like ending doctor strikes, like keeping those blast furnaces open at Scunthorpe, like the raise in the minimum wage? Because to me, it just feels like there is good stuff that they don't want to talk about, and they are always fighting on Nigel Farage's patch over those things that make them look inauthentic by comparison to him.
I think part of it is the, in my view, incorrect decision to treat the sort of top members of the cabinet as a team and not allow them to develop their own brands and their own personalities, which we've discussed before, because I think at this stage you need that.
Yeah.
You need people to have someone they like in government. And if you corporatize it to this extent, then it just looks really technocratic. And I'm not sure when people voted for change, they were voting for technocratic. They were voting for something a bit more radical than that. The second aspect of it, I think, is that Labour's comms are too dry. They are incapable of winning over hearts. And having secured a big mandate, I think you now have to start winning over some hearts. And all the stuff they're doing is pretty heartless. I mean, I understand the difficult decisions, and this is the basic criticism of all the people who are saying, it's simple, all you need to do is X, Y, and Z. But when you say, how do you fund that? Do you put up taxes? What happens to the economy? What happens to bonds? They don't really have answers. So that approach is as populist as right-wing populism is. It is a slightly more complicated puzzle to solve. But at the heart of it, there has to be an effort to say, this is what we stand for, this is what we're doing, and it's a good thing. And Labour are just not doing that at the moment. You know, it's all very, very dry.
It is. I think it's a monumental failure in communication. It's a failure to respond to how people are feeling. It is a failure of the actual message and of the messengers, either because they're not letting their great communicators go out and flex a bit from the technocratic line or show a bit of their more human side, or because the messengers that they are just wheeling out are not charismatic figures. And you can't promise change, which was the buzzword of the election, is the reason why people were so fed up with 14 years of Conservative rule and not feeling like it had benefited them in any way, that they were really crying out for something to change quickly and radically. And so you can't promise change and then talk about school breakfast clubs, as honourable as they are, like they are radical reform. They're good, but they're not going to be the thing that everyone goes, oh, okay, well, the country's fixed then. But when Farage speaks, and look, I don't like the man. I don't agree with him on anything much at all. But when he speaks, he is confident, he is clear, and he has a motive. And like most populists, he does that very well. But then you also do have examples of that, like Bernie Sanders in America, who does it incredibly, incredibly well too. So while I don't like Farage, I do understand why many voters do like him at the moment and haven't been put off by him. And of course, we hope that the media machine gets its act together and starts to scrutinise Reform UK properly on everything and anything they would do policy-wise once in government, which they've totally been let off the hook for at the moment. But my fear is that among the current crop of ministers, very few who can do that human appeal.
And the ones who do get slapped down by number 10 the next morning. I mean, we've seen it time and time again, right? The people who try to articulate something in a slightly more human way that is outside the very strict parameters of the line to take, they get smacked by number 10. So I'm painting a relatively bleak picture. And I don't mean to, actually, because I will now come to the last effect of these local elections, which I think can be very, very positive, okay? And that is the longer term effect. Reform will be under more scrutiny. In 4 years, they will have a record to defend. You will be able to show how the councils they're running are doing. They will be a much bigger target with questionable personalities in the mix, like Andrea Jenkins and Darren Grimes freestyling in the media. These are not people known for their message discipline.
Illegal migrants, people come here illegally. They should be put in tents like they do in France.
People are seeking asylum should also be put in tents?
Well, I think genuine asylum seekers, like Ukraine, etc., that's a different matter.
And then you also accused one candidate. You made a comment about her South African accent. What did you mean by that?
I think, actually, I'm not even going to answer any more of your questions. I think that your questioning is quite divisive. You're looking into things when it was a little play with words. It was a little joke because of the irony. Do you not understand irony?
I do think that the most disastrous possible future would have been to experience this kind of surge in momentum in the next local elections, like a year out from the general election. Actually getting that now does mean that hopefully the media will start concentrating on them a little bit more seriously, questioning them about policy a bit more seriously. We will inevitably see madcap councillors saying madcap things that will put a big, big question mark on the vetting procedures and on the sort of people they attract. We will see them struggle to administer councils because they're simply not organized enough, because so far they've just been sniping from the sidelines. They haven't had to actually run anything. And so I do think that's a really positive development. I think the worst thing would have been for them to sort of come second within 1% everywhere,
and not really,
because that would give them the momentum, but none of the scrutiny. So at least now they will get scrutinized. I'm hoping.
Let's hope. I think what comes before all of that is a focus on the Conservative Party decline, and that will be, I suspect, where a lot of the political journalism analysis will be, to break out of that binary two-party dominant system that we've had for over 100 years is going to be really difficult for lobby journalists in particular to get their heads around. And the eyes will be focused very much as well as how Labour are going to react to this, but on Badenoch's future, why the Tory party has had such a dramatic decline, whether they will all now just pretty much port straight over into reform, and that will be the new single party on the right of government. So while I don't disagree with you, and I hope very much that it happens, and my goodness, it should have happened a lot longer ago than it has done, there will be a real focus on where for the right as a whole, and whether the Tory party will inevitably end up morphing into the reform blob. Listeners, call to action. If you've not yet done so, and even if you have and you just want to reinforce it, please write to your MP about the proposed welfare cuts, because minds within Parliament will be much more sharply focused about being punished for backing such a devastating policy for so many vulnerable people and their families. And I think the odds of getting a change to the measures has probably increased a little bit in light of the election.
Because they were talked about on the doorstep a lot. That is coming back from every single person I know that canvassed for Labour. It was all PIP payments and winter fuel allowance.
And in some Labour seats, 1 in 5 people are in receipt of a benefit, whether that's an in-work benefit or not. And all of those people have families, they have friends, they will be talking about their precarious situation and the uncertainty about how these cuts are going to affect them with so many, many people. So it isn't just an issue that affects those in receipt of welfare. It has an impact on a far greater population across the voter base in the UK. So an email today is probably worth double what it was last week. So yeah, Google how to write to your MP, fire something off.
Quiet Riot. This episode is brought to you by GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. Get the most out of your vehicle with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco original equipment. The only parts designed, engineered, tested, and backed by General Motors. You can find your perfect fit for most makes and models and choose from 3 tiers of parts, including GM OE or gold and silver aftermarket parts. Visit gmparts.com for more information.
Quiet Riot. Given the Australian tradition of voting in skimpy swimwear, I must admit I had completely misunderstood what a democracy sausage was. At the time of recording on Saturday afternoon, the Australian election has been called for the incumbent Anthony Albanese government, Labour.
A majority Labor government promised and delivered. A short time ago, I spoke with Peter Dutton, who has, of course, conceded defeat. And I thanked him. No. What we do in Australia is we treat people with respect. Now, at election time, parties and candidates ask people to make a choice. And inevitably, the campaign and the coverage is about our differences and our disagreements. But now that the Australian people have made their clear choice, let us all reflect on what we have in common. Because no matter who you voted for, no matter where you live, no matter how you worship or who you love, whether you belong to a culture that has known and cared for this great continent for 65,000 years, or you have chosen our nation as your home and enriched our society with your contribution, We are all Australians.
Although the precise result is not home and housed yet, as the expression seems to go there, further complicated very annoyingly by the legend, the national treasure that is Anthony Green, the equivalent of our Peter Snow at ABC News, losing access to the apparently Amazon servers and being unable to use graphics when calling the election on the very last year before he retires. Very, very vexing. Although voting before polling day in Australia tends to favour the Liberals, remember they are the Tories over there, and tends to get counted later in the night. So that's a little caveat, but the counter swing required at this point would have to be bigger than anything we have seen before. It even looks at this stage as if Peter Dutton, the Liberal leader, pretty universally accepted as having had a horrible campaign, might go the way of Pierre Poilievre in Canada and lose his own seat.
Tony Barry, even Peter Dutton's own seat of Dixon is in trouble. How worried are you about what's happening to the coalition right now?
Well, I think my biggest concern, and we saw this in our research, was the Liberal base is now basically boomers. And I don't say that in a pejorative way. I'm spiritually a boomer. But it's too narrow a base to win an election on. And we've failed to expand the base. And if you can't expand the base, you can't expand the electoral map. So I think this is going to be a thumping.
Naomi, just like in Canada, although much lower orders of magnitude, the Conservatives were headed for a comfortable win a few months ago. And just like in Canada, there are a ton of other factors at play, but the Trump effect, there is no denying it, especially considering how closely Dutton had echoed MAGA talking points. So are we beginning to see a pattern of kickback internationally and leaders who hitch their wagon to Trump being personally punished?
Not in Runcorn. So, being facetious and back to the kind of Labour comm stuff, my goodness, Labour in the UK needs to be doing far more to talk up the closeness of the Trump-Farage relationship. But look, when we analyse what voters have been saying in Australia, and it is all very, 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 newly trickling out over the course of the weekend, it is very similar to what we are hearing in the USA, in the UK, in Canada. It is issues around cost of living, around public services, particularly healthcare. It is around issues like that people are getting frightened. And what you've got with Canada and Australia is the benefit of knowing what impact Trump's tariffs have had and are likely to have in an inflationary direction, exacerbating those cost of living issues that people are scared about. So if you have hitched your political wagon to his lack of economic strategy or very, very dangerous economic strategy, it is no surprise you're being punished. For some progressives, of course, it will just be very much a visceral, this is not a man with whom I agree on anything, regardless of what he'd done economically. But then for those that may be more, national coalition, liberal minded in Australia, to have felt the effect of that or the warning shots of what's to come as a consequence of the trade war, I think would be enough to get you squeezed over into the Australian Labour camp.
It's interesting that there were similar kind of grumblings about Labour really not delivering enough in its first terms, not going far enough. Again, 4 or 5 months ago, we were looking at a very, very different situation. And it needs to be noted here that Australians tend to give governments at least 2 terms. Like they haven't turfed out a first-term government in a century. So the pattern of the polls a few months ago that were showing impatience with Albanese and Australians were about to turn back to the Liberal, the Conservative coalition over there were unusual. Is there a way that Starmer could be getting that benefit over here, which he's plainly currently not getting?
No, he's not. And he's plainly not because he's courting an economic deal with the USA quite a bit. And there's been a lot of positioning of the UK as that bridge between the EU and the US and talking up what an important defence and security partner the US is and special relationship. So it's been harder for him to, or has it been harder? It's been a choice to say, no, we're going to try and get the best of both worlds. We want to keep everyone together. All of these people are important to UK interests. We're not going to annoy anyone. But certainly those that have taken a strident approach to Trump do seem to be being rewarded, as we've seen from Mark Carney and Albanese.
You know, I had someone say to me yesterday, Mark Carney's first speech was a very different animal to what Starmer says about the Trump White House. I would point to the fact that Starmer, I think, is in a much trickier position vis-a-vis Ukraine. He's acting as a sort of mediator to try and get some kind of reconciliation between the US and Ukraine and advance that situation a little bit further. You know, Mark Carney saying, fuck you, USA, doesn't really impact that in any way whatsoever. But Starmer saying that, it would be then very difficult to turn around and say, do you want to send someone so we can have a chat with Zelensky about how we take this thing forward?
I think the problem is for some of those that just doesn't feel credible and doesn't seem to be working now that White House has said we're walking away from the Russia-Ukraine thing altogether. They signed the minerals deal, and then 24 hours later, we're pulling out. This thing ain't going to be over anytime soon. We have failed to stop it within 24 hours or 100 days.
Sure, but that's in the last 24 hours. That might change, actually, the reaction coming from Europe.
Well, look, with Trump, anything can bloody change. But I think when you could almost argue it from the other direction, though, that Carney, literally with this enormous land border, enormous amounts of cross-border trade, enormous interdependence between their two economies, would have even less leverage to put his own country's interests at risk by challenging Trump, but yet has done, and he's been rewarded for standing up to a bully. So yeah, I think you can argue it from both directions. I do take your point entirely, and of course it's a difficult situation for all of them. But if we're looking at what voters seem to reward, and voters on most sides of the political spectrum dislike Trump in the UK, whether you are, reform curious or a Green voter, you dislike Trump. There are, of course, a handful of solid reform voters that think he's wonderful, Farage amongst them. But it doesn't appear to be a vote winner for leaders around the world, particularly not those leading notionally progressive coalitions.
I don't disagree with that. Again, I would just add a pinch of nuance in that the timing of the elections has meant very different things for the two. I mean, Mark Carney got elected explicitly on a mandate to stand up to Trump.
Indeed.
And so he's in a very different position. If you are going to go properly after Farage, you need to do so on his position on Russia, on his position on Trump, on his position on Brexit. And you can't really do that if you are equivocal on those issues. You can't be talking out of both sides of your mouth. And so actually, maybe this points to a strategy for Labour, doesn't it? Because it means that if you clarified your position on Trump and clarified your position on Brexit and were more ambitious about, getting closer to Europe and decided which side your bread is buttered on, that would actually release you politically to attack the person that is emerging as a very serious challenger more robustly and more directly. So you would get both benefits. You would get the benefit of growth from getting closer to the EU, and you would get the benefit of a clearer attack on Farage for getting the country into this mess in the first place.
It's win-win. It's win-win. It's completely win-win. If you are able to pull it off, if you are the kind of communicator that can do it. And I think that's where a lot of people are now beginning to get nervous about the exact thing we talked about earlier, the messengers that can have that authentic, robust, inspiring challenge to a debater like Farage. But you're dead right. And actually getting back to your very first question to me about gossip from Europe, it came through again, as it does every single time I speak to people in Brussels. What does your government want, Naomi? We still don't know. We've come with our mandate from the Commission, very open about what it is that we would like to see from the reset. We still don't know what you guys want. And if they don't know, then British voters sure as hell don't know.
Quiet, riot. My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Quiet Riot.
Is there also a kernel of hope for Labour and progressives in this country to see that, positions can change radically and quickly when the facts surrounding them change and the approach of the incumbent changes, which we saw again both in Canada and Australia? And actually, even looking back at, those 2021 local elections that were the high watermark for the Conservatives. I mean, at that point, they were bringing in the vaccine program sooner than anyone would have hoped. Rishi Sunak was basically handing out free money to everyone. Partygate hadn't broken, remember, until November 2021, and they were riding on a high. And a year later, they were 20 points behind and getting rid of Johnson.
Exactly. The tectonic plates of politics shift beneath our feet far more quickly than they ever did 10, 15 years ago, and certainly before that. The government know that, the UK government know that. They will all be trying to calm everybody down by saying the general election is 4 years away. You cannot read too much into this. Everything can change. We've got a plan. The fruits will be born by the time of that election. People will be feeling richer. We'll have, better public services. It'll all be okay. My fear is that having lived through the coalition with the Liberal Democrats, doing something unpopular early in the term. What do I mean by unpopular? I don't mean necessarily just straight up politically unpopular, but something seen as antithetical to their brand, which is the Osbornomics combined with the U-turn on tuition fees. You saw them lose councillors in 2011, 2012, 2013. They get wiped out at the European elections, bar one in 2014. And then by 2015 general election, they've lost nearly all of their MPs. So that's my fear, is that when you do something inauthentic, even if the tide turns against the opposition in a big direction, or big scandals break and all the things that we know about from Reform's pedigree on these matters coming to the fore, if you've done such inauthentic things to your brand as the benefit cuts, etc., it can be really, really hard. So don't ignore the warning shots you're getting from the voters in the run up to a general election.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It is a comforting mechanism to say this doesn't matter, the general elections are 4 years away. All of that is true, but it's still an actual vote that indicates how people are feeling about you. And the Labour strategy seems to focus by saying by that point the economy will be better, public services will be better. That's still also concentrating on the wavering voters you hope to win back. In the meantime, if you have lost emotionally your faithful, if you have emotionally lost your base to other parties, to Greens, to the Liberal Democrats, that is really hard to get back by saying, look at the economy, we've had 2% growth.
And that degree, we will, of course, be interviewing Zach Polanski about the Green Party in the main show this week. But
he's on this week,
Yeah, on the Greens, though, I mean, look at Runcorn. The Lib Dems were squeezed to nothing. Labour did manage to do that. There wasn't a huge Lib Dem vote there anyway, but what was there did get squeezed away. Green vote, not a bit of it. They got nearly 8%. Their vote really held up. They were not going to be blackmailed into the it's us or reform. And that, I think, is a really important warning shot for Labour, to that very point you made about emotion.
Vital, because what it says is that actually the left of your vote wants to give you as much a punch in the nose as reform voters do. Their objective aligns insofar as they want to kick you. And that is a really dangerous position to be in. And it's actually the position the Conservatives are in. And that's why they're sliding to that extent. One last question, Naomi, because I know it tickles your geekery. What do you think of the Australian electoral system? It's not PR. It's a hybrid, similar to what we had in the London mayoral elections. There's a sort of first vote that is your first preference, and then a second vote that says, if you had to choose between these two top contenders, who would be your least bad outcome. What do you think of it?
Well, it's also worth remembering that they have compulsory voting. And that means their turnout is about 90% compared to, say, UK and US last year that got in the kind of 60% figures. So I'd love to know what listeners think about that. And if you've got a view, do you think we should have compulsory voting? Do write
what
in
do you
or
think?
Send us a blue sky. I don't think we should, but I'd be very keen to know what others do.
The liberal position. You see, in Greece you have compulsory voting, so I've grown up with it. So to me, it's quite normal. It's basically a message that voting is a civic duty. It's a responsibility, basically.
Yeah, and I think I'm open to persuasion on it, particularly if you can't be penalised for, scribbling "you're all as bad as each other" on your ballot paper, or
or drawing a tick, which I understand that is the Australian way of saying none of the above. The completely acceptable way is to draw a penis.
Okay. I mean, I'll get practicing.
Again, that democracy sausage comes up.
back, yeah. So in Australia, they have two systems, okay? So they have AV, alternative vote, preferential voting, which you've just described and that they had for this election. But then for the upper chamber, so their equivalent of the House of Lords, Senate, they have proportionate voting. And they have PR under single transferable vote, which would always be my favoured electoral system. So, yes, are always thinking as a party in Australia about how to get your second preferences. It does force them to build broader coalitions. They can't simply think about core vote and getting that core vote turned out. They've got to think beyond that a little bit. And that does therefore have a tendency to reward parties that are less alienating to the majority. So parties on the extreme left and the extreme right do not like this voting system. It can produce very disproportionate outcomes, but less so than a first past the post winner takes all approach. I think that speaks perfectly to everything that we were just mentioning with regard to Labour and this broad coalition it needs to hang together. And if we were to have a system that allowed for a bit more preferential voting, it would force Labour to be thinking about, okay, well, I need to bloody well make sure that I get my Labour loyalists turned out, but that I can persuade some of the Greens and the Lib Dems to give me their second preference.
Yeah. It's been so fascinating watching a lot of Australian news in the last week, because you do see that in action. And it's been a really surprising and refreshing and different aspect of Australian politics. So the instruction, I guess, parties give, or the encouragement parties give to their voters as to whom they will give their second preference to, is a really key thing. You have constituencies where the Conservatives are basically telling people, vote for Labour as a second preference because they really don't want the Greens to get in. There are constituencies where Labour has been scandalised because the Greens have refused to give them their second preference vote. And
if people are really interested in this, I'd suggest you look up the Teal movement, TEAL, in Australia. Really interesting. They are kind of community independents. They're usually kind of centrist-ish, and they've been characterised as being, strongly advocating to mitigate climate change. They share some socially liberal outlooks on LGBT rights and things like that. It's a blend of the blue Liberal Party, the conservatively economic people, but while satisfying green politics. And really interesting how that has fed into the landscape of Australian elections over the last few years. So definitely worth reading up on that if this kind of thing floats your boat.
And that's it for today's Sunday School. We are pleased we were able to bring you some good news with the bad. Please head over to ko-fi.com/quietrightpod to support our effort to bring good content without discriminating between those who can pay and those who cannot.
We have a bonus episode out on Tuesday with special guest Peter Fitzsimons, where we're going to be diving into the detail of that Australian result. So make sure you're following the show for that episode to land directly onto your device.
Now, go outside and commute with a bit of nature, unless you're out there already and have us in your earbuds. Stretch your legs, have your favorite ice cream, and everything will start to look better.
And remember, unlike fickle voters, our loyalty to you is unconditional. Keep writing quietly. We'll see you again soon. And we love you lots. Bye.
Bye.
Quite Right is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. and edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot. And one guy, he was up there with our mum, and he went up there, and he was coming back down towards us, and he goes, "Run, he's got a gun." And our heart started to pound, and I said, "Oh, Mum, where's Mum?" And poor Mum was stuck up there, but apparently our brave Mum, she goes, "Are you all right?" Because he had all blood all over his face. And he goes, "I'll shoot you." She goes, "Hey, I'm here to help."